So for this video, I'm gonna create a basic Azure load balancer, and a load balancer just does exactly what it says. It helps manage the load that servers take on through distribution. So you set up a load balancer that has a front end IP that accepts traffic from users, and then it uses load balancing rules to determine the ports and direct traffic to the right VM in the backend pool. And the load balancer also periodically sends out health probes to the VMs in the backend pool to test if a VM in it is healthy enough to be used. So the steps for like configuration, um, because you can't just create a load balancer here, it won't work properly. Is you first got to create the VMs that you want in the virtual pool in the backend pool, and then I'm gonna install IIS on both of them. I'm gonna create two, so I'm gonna talk while I start creating. So yeah, so you create the virtual machines, install IIS, and then I'm gonna make them web servers, and then also you need to get a public IP address for the load balancer, and then you get the load balancer, and then you create the backend pool, and then you add a health probe. So first we're gonna create two virtual machines. Put in availability set, and we'll create a new one. And I'll just keep the default. Let's do Windows. I'm gonna keep it this like a download IIS. If I do P1, it won't have enough resources. So I'm gonna add HTTP, so I could make a web host, and that should be good. I'm gonna come back when it's okay. Actually, so I'm gonna connect to this one and install IIS, but while I wait for deploy, I'm gonna create a second one. Put in the same availability set. Windows, good. I don't know if I put David or admin for the first one. I think it's David. And I'm gonna add 480, and everything else should be good. In networking, it created a virtual network already in the first one. So actually, let me make sure it's in the same one. Yeah. So I'm gonna come back and go to the first one when it's deployed. Alright, the first virtual machine's ready. Let's go to it. Let's connect RDP, and through its public IP address, yep. Download the session. And like in the previous video, we're gonna install IIS, but while it's getting set up, I'm gonna see if the second one's ready. Nope. And I'll come back when there. It's almost ready. Okay, second one's, and we'll be ready to connect to it after we do the first one. So you go to Server Manager, it should open up by itself. Add roles and features. It's updating. I'm gonna start getting the second one ready. Connect RDP. Download the file. Run it. Alright, so load balance, it's ready. Add roles. Next. Role-based, feature-based installation. Next. That's our virtual machine. And we want IIS. The features checked. Next. Looks good. Keep clicking next. Yep. And it's installed. Now let's go to our second one. And I'll pause when it's done initializing. Okay, it's ready. Never mind. Okay, now it's ready. Next. Next. Install. And I'm going to go to Notepad and create a simple HTML file. Save it. Oh, it's not going to work until it's done installing, I think. Yeah. Alright, we'll wait. Let's go to the first one. Alright, it's succeeded. Installation closed. And tools, you can see that it's up here. Yeah, so let's create a notepad file here, HTML. And go to C drive, and that hub, www root, and change it to all files. Default.html. I'll put it. Whoops. Alright, there we go. Let's go to the other one. It's done. Now we can save it. Alright, so now let's confirm that IIS works on these virtual machines for both of them. I guess I'll just go on the second virtual machine, copy the public IP address, and let's connect, and it works. And slash default.html. There we go. Now let's go to the first one. Copy the public IP. Let me put an order. Okay, IIS works. Slash default HTML, default load 1, and then the second one. So it works. Okay, so let's review. We created the virtual machines, we installed IIS on them to make a web host, and so that's going to be considered our backend pool, but we'll do that later. So the next step is to create the public IP address. So let's go home, create public IP address, create IPv4 SKU. Let's do basic because we're going to create a basic load balancer. Let's give it a name of load. And let's do static IP address so then it doesn't change. And do everything else. You could give it a label if you want, I'm not going to. And let's go to it. It's ready. Nice. Alright, so it's good. Got our public IP address. So the next step is to actually create the load balancer. So I'm just typing load balancer. I'm gonna hit enter. I'm not gonna click any of these because I want one from Microsoft, and look how many there is. Here's Microsoft, but let's say it didn't pop up there. We could change the publisher type and Microsoft. And let's do this one. Let's create it. Alright, so give it a name. Load balancer. Wow. Okay. And I want it to be public so that it's be able to be reached from the internet. And let's do basic SKU because I just want a basic load balancer, and let's see what I messed up. I really wish they let you click instead of clicking previews. Front end IP, okay. Oh, okay, well it's public IP address. Let's do the one that we created earlier, the load IP, and the front end IP address will be front end IP, IPv4, and then let's do review and create. Alright, validation passed, let's create it. I'll come back when it's ready. Alright, so the load balancer is ready. So now we're going to configure it. So we created VNet when we created the virtual machines, we installed IIS on them, and then we just created the load balancer. So, and when we created load balancer, we also created the public front end IP address with it. So now we want to create the backend pool, and so we got to associate those virtual machines we created earlier to it. So let's do add. We can call it swimming pool virtual network. It's going to be the one that you connect your virtual machines to. Virtual machines IPv4, and let's add the virtual machines. Add both. That was weird. Whatever. I'm going to add both of them to it, to our pool, and add. I'll come back when it's ready. So the next step is to create, so it's ready. The next step is to create the health probe, because when users are trying to request to the web host, the load balancer is going to accept them and try to determine which virtual machines to put it to assign to handle that request. And if there's multiple users, then it needs to know if the virtual machine is healthy so that it could accept that traffic. So anyway, let's just verify the backend pool. Yep, it's running. So now we're gonna do the health probe. Let's add. Call it probe 1. So it's gonna use this. The way the probe works is it's gonna use the TCP protocol using port 80, and since that's the port that we have open on our virtual machines, that's IIS on it, it's gonna send a request to each virtual machine, and it's going to do it every 5 seconds, and it's going to send a request to the virtual machine, and then the virtual machine is going to say, yes, I'm healthy. And if it doesn't, then it's a failure. And so this says, okay, after it takes up to, it needs 2 failures before it's considered unhealthy, the virtual machine. So it fails once after it sends it after 5 seconds, and then it tries to send another health probe, and then it fails again. Okay, now that virtual machine's unhealthy. So let's add it. Come back when it's ready. Okay, cool, it's ready. So the last step, let's just look, health probe, here it is. So the last step is we create our backend pool, and then we create a health probe, but we didn't actually create the load balancing rule that uses these to say, hey, you have these virtual machines in this pool, so when users are requesting to use them, and after it's been checked to be healthy, where do you direct the traffic to? So it's great. So load balancing pool 1. And so you gotta pick your front end IP that you created earlier. We'll do TCP. So we create a load balancer, and we want to listen on port 80, and then the backend port for the virtual machines for IIS is port 80. The backend pools that we created earlier, the health probe created earlier, and I'm going to keep these all default. And you add it. So now it has a rule to listen on port 80 and direct it to port 80 on the virtual machines. Alright, so let's just check. It's ready. Boom. And so that's it. We set up everything so the load balancer should work. Let's just take its public IP. And so this was the first virtual machine, is the second one. So if we just put in the public IP, oh, we don't want that, of the balancer, load balancer, we'll do that, and then we do. So it's I'm a user connecting to it, so it's either gonna choose the first virtual machine or the second one. So let's see which one it picks. Alright, pick the first one. Now if another user requested should connect to the web host, it'll probably load the second one of this one, but I can't test that right now, or I just don't feel like it. But that's what the load balancer does. It'll balance them out between the 2 virtual machines in the backend pool. If we create more, then it'll split it up. But one thing to note that I didn't mention is that it's in charge of distributing virtual machines, but it's not. But it doesn't work on the application level. That's your responsibility to ensure that you have the data installed on both or all the virtual machines in your backend pool. It's only meant to check if the virtual machine's healthy, and to send traffic from the users, not to add the data. And I didn't say that about the last video too, which was, let me check. Last video was, Oh yeah, scale sets. Scale sets is it's the same thing as like similar to load balancing where it doesn't transfer to your app data. So pay attention to that. And so that's how have a load balancer.